My last video was honestly emotionally exhausting. That ending sequence is literally playing on a loop in my head. I desperately need something to take my mind off it, God please. What about this? Oh, a proper Jinchu adaptation? Okay, sure, I criticized the live action a lot previously on this channel, but I still adore them. Moreover, it's literally like my favorite arc of my favorite manga ever, so like, surely that can only make me feel better, right? Rurouni Kenshin The Final is the last live-action film in the saga, adapting the final arc of, well, Rurouni Kenshin. And I have to admit that it was the one I was the most curious about before watching, and I had a lot of expectations, because we're talking about an incredibly beloved arc that, if you think about it, has never received a proper anime adaptation. And while many people are still hoping that the remake will eventually fix that, including myself, but at the time I'm recording this, aside from a few key scenes in reflection, the film remains the only way to experience the Jinchu arc in something resembling a complete adaptation. And I really do mean something resembling, because even here several elements were cut or altered, and it's far from being a 100% faithful adaptation. And if you watch this movie and then go read the manga afterwards, you're going to notice that a lot of chapters and just a lot of events have been just suppressed. So today I'm continuing my series of reviews of the Rurouni Kenshin live action films with The Final, which was released only a few months apart from the beginning, and those two movies are meant to be watched alongside. What's really interesting is that the beginning, which focuses on Kenshin's past and his relationship with Tomoe, is actually the final story in terms of release order. But both chronologically and in the manga, the Jinchu arc is actually the final arc. So the remembered chapters are just a component of it, and just a flashback section nested within the larger arc. If you're watching this video, I'm going to assume that you've either read the manga or you're already like somewhat familiar with the events of the Jinchu arc, or that maybe you just already watched the films, because I'd love sincerely to make this review completely accessible to newcomers, but considering we're discussing the final installments of an entire saga of 5 movies in general, that's just not going to happen. So from this point onward, I'm going full spoiler mode. That said, I do want to add that the live action films are a fantastic gateway in the world of Rurouni Kenshin, so I'd hate to spoil that experience for anyone who hasn't watched them yet. For a bit of context, the film adapts the final arc of the manga, which is, as I said before, pretty massive. We're talking about multiple phases of conflict, a lengthy and emotionally devastating flashback section, then a second phase containing the climax and final confrontations. And that's a lot of chapters. And that's not even mentioning the chapters dedicated to various characters and their respective developments. So a lot happens, a lot. And trying to condense all of that into a 2-hour film, even if you remove the entirety of Remembrance, it's really a big challenge. And did the film succeed to that challenge? I'm not convinced. This arc revolves around a much more personal conflict than previous ones. Instead of threatening the future of Japan itself like Shishio did, the story focuses on Enishi Yukishiro, who is Tomoe's younger brother. Tomoe, of course, is Kenshin's former wife, and also the woman he killed with his own hands. Remember that Enishi literally saw a man that he already despises because he had previously killed his sister's fiance, cutting down his own sister right in front of him while he was still a child. Even if he wasn't a child, this is some traumatizing shit, like no wonder why he hates Kenshin. And years later, Enishi is finally ready to enact his revenge. So that's why the arc is called Jinchu, which roughly translates to human retribution, as opposed to Tenshu, which refers to divine punishment or heavenly judgment. The idea is simple. Enishi can't accept the fact that Battosai the manslayer has been allowed to live peacefully after everything he's done, so he decides to deliver the punishment himself, not only by targeting Kenshin directly, but also by destroying everything he loves everything he built and everything he left behind.
抜刀斎、俺がお前に与えたいのは痛みではない。苦しみだ。
This is an incredibly dense and emotionally heavy arc, and it's the kind of misunderstanding that absolutely cannot be solved over just like a cup of tea. And just when Kenshin thought that he could finally enjoy a peaceful life, now backed by the Chinese mafia, Enishi, who made some connections along the way, is determined to make him pay. So he just launches attacks left and right, he shows up out of nowhere to jump scare bro out of a bridge, and he slowly drags Kenshin back into the darkest corners of his past. This is my favorite arc in the entire manga. This is where the emotional impact and the message of Rurouni Kenshin reaches its full potential. And don't get me wrong, I love the series as a whole, but this particular arc resonates with me on a whole different level because it combines tenderness, tragedy, incredible fights, and a clash of ideals and emotions unlike anything else. And the antagonist, oh boy, the antagonist is phenomenal. Not only is Enishi my favorite antagonist in Rurouni Kenshin, but he's just one of my favorite antagonists, period, and I'm not open to debate. If anything, this film only reinforced that opinion. Enishi was handled so well during the entirety of the movie, it actually baffles me how ridiculously well the directors and everyone that worked for the movie just understood his character as a whole. For starters, they cast an actor who absolutely knew what he was doing. He has the same aura and the same charisma, and now that I think about it, why does this guy kind of look familiar? I knew I'd seen that face before, so that means that there's a universe, an alternate universe where Enishi and Zoro are basically the same person. Now that's interesting. An incredible amount of care and attention was put into Enishi throughout this film in order to make him both threatening as an antagonist, but also deeply sympathetic as a young boy and as a human being who lost the most important person in his life, the sister who also raised him on her own. She's way more than just a sister, she's basically his mother figure and the person who raised him and taught him everything and gave him love, affection, and a human presence and warmth. So after her death, he never really had the opportunity to grow up normally and in a healthy way. He spent years wandering through terrible conditions, surviving on things that barely qualified as food, so naturally he's not exactly the picture of perfect psychological stability. The manga already emphasized this aspect of his character quite well. Enishi constantly hallucinates Tomoe, for example, because she's his compass. If she's smiling, everything is fine, but if she stops smiling, he completely falls apart and loses his mind. So yes, this is a man who is in desperate need of therapy, and blowing up restaurants is not going to help your problems. Like, do you understand that? The filmmakers took a subtle but surprisingly effective approach. Instead of portraying him as someone who almost sadistically enjoys watching Kenshin break down, this version of Enishi feels more restrained, more composed, more reserved, but also far more unpredictable. Now, I'm not saying that those qualities weren't already present in the manga, and in fact, they were a huge part of what made him such an effective antagonist. But here, they work even better because the film constantly catches us off guard whenever he finally loses control. Take the scene where he lashes out at Kaoru and tries to strangle her. It comes completely out of nowhere, at least that's how I perceived it. And that's why it works. And by the way, this scene is in the manga, I know it, but I preferred the way it was handled in the movie because of that change, that subtle change in his characterization. This is not an act of calculated cruelty, it's an impulsive outburst of violence from someone who's momentarily overwhelmed by his anger, rage, and emotions. In short, this version of Enishi spends most of the film holding himself together, only to explode during key moments, which somehow makes him even more compelling. There's also one other scene that really stood out to me. It's the scene where Enishi breaks down and cries alone in the rain. The composition is gorgeous, look at that. that. The blue tinted palette that draws all of our attention towards his figure. The entire sequence feels much less cartoonish because Tomoe's ghost never actually appears, and that's the kind of detail that works perfectly in manga form. On the page, it feels natural because it's a drawing, but on a live action screen, it can very quickly become unintentionally ridiculous. So I'm glad they removed this. And if anything, I'd say that it makes Enishi's attachment to Tomoe even more powerful, more intimate, almost as if the two of them exist inside a world and a bubble that nobody else can access, a space that we are not allowed to enter as outsiders. The film does, however, retain Enishi's characteristic nonchalance, especially during its phenomenal opening sequence. It's a fantastic immediate res introduction that immediately throws us into the action and makes one thing very clear: Enishi doesn't give a fuck, and he absolutely has no limits. He has no intention of letting anyone stand in his way. He openly mocks the police officers who are trying to arrest him on the train, and throughout the entire sequence he carries that wonderfully condescending attitude that I just can't get enough of, even if he's technically just committing murders and murders. Overall, we're looking at a very strong opening sequence, a very promising one. It's a film that immediately grabs your attention and seems to understand exactly what makes its central antagonist so fascinating, which naturally raises the question: what exactly went wrong afterward? The more I think about it, the more I feel like the film relied far too heavily on the relationship and the conflict between Enishi, Tomoe, and Kenshin. And in retrospect, I don't think that approach entirely works. Sure, we get intense and emotionally charged fights. We get an Enishi who's completely losing it and pouring all of his anger onto Kenshin. We get a fascinating exploration of grief and loss that shows how obsessive hatred accomplishes nothing except deepening a wound that never healed in the first place. But Jinchu is also so much more than just this conflict. It's a story that unfolds gradually. At its core, it's a slow descent into hell and agony for Kenshin. It's a story that unfolds gradually over numerous chapters, and it's a story that needs to build up during numerous chapters, where the attacks become more frequent and more personal, and Kenshin slowly realizes that someone is targeting him specifically. Worse still, this conflict doesn't remain contained between him and Enishi alone. It spreads, and it affects innocent people who have absolutely nothing to do with any of this. Kenshin falls once again into a cycle of guilt and self-blame, but through his friends and through Kaoru in particular, and just wait, we're going to talk about Kaoru. He eventually realizes something important. As he says himself, that warmth is real, the sweat they've shed together is real, the people around him are here for him, he has friends he can rely on, he has a place he treasures, he has a home he will go back to, and out of respect for those people, he needs to trust them instead of shutting himself off and trying to carry every burden alone. But obviously, when you're adapting an arc into a film, compromises have to be made. You have to make choices and you have to cut things. The problem is that, as usual, the film chooses to preserve the action sequences, which is the main selling point of these live-action adaptations, at the expense of the quieter moments. And once again, don't get me wrong, I love those action scenes. They are well choreographed, just well realized in general. But Rurouni Kenshin is a manga where the fights matter because of those quieter moments. So aside from the final battle, I often felt like I was being bombarded with fight after fight after fight. Some of them aren't even particularly well paced, and I glazed over those fight scenes, but I gotta admit that out of all the 5 live-action movies, this is the one where the fight scenes are the least well handled, because it constantly jumps between multiple confrontations and it gave me a headache. At times, I had no idea where I was supposed to be looking. I blinked for 2 seconds and there are 300 people lying unconscious on the floor, like, what is happening? The film would have benefited immensely if even a fraction of the care and attention devoted to Enishi and all of those fight scenes had also been given to the other characters, and at the very least to Kaoru. I know Enishi is the star of the film alongside Kenshin, of course, but pushing a character this important to the sidelines genuinely drives me insane. And I know what you're thinking. I am not saying this solely because I am an unapologetic Kaoru fan. Okay, maybe a little. But Kaoru is a pillar of this arc. There are so many scenes involving her that should have been included, and I'd go as far as to say that she is the heart of this arc, but also of the entire manga. And now that I think about it, Kaoru hasn't exactly been treated particularly well throughout all of the 5 live-action films. Most of the time, she's left sitting on the sidelines, and because of that, some scenes end up feel flat or even meaningless. I try to put myself in the shoes of someone who's never read the manga or watched the anime at the very least. Like, imagine being that viewer, maybe it's you. At some point, you're probably asking yourself, wait, who is that girl? Who is she?
Wait a minute! Who are you?
She appears every now and then. Kenshin gets upset when she's kidnapped. She hands him an umbrella, yada yada yada, and suddenly they're in love forever, and I'm supposed to believe that. Okay, if you only watch the live actions and you're not a manga reader or an anime watcher and you enjoyed the romance between Kaoru and Kenshin, well, good for you, because it was supposed to be 10 times better, at least 10 times better. Okay guys, repeat after me. You cannot adapt a story whose romance is essential to the narrative and then proceed to remove the romance. I repeat, you cannot adapt a romance and remove the fucking romance! And maybe some will think that I am supposedly exaggerating, but I'm not. Like, I'm not asking for a 100% faithful adaptation. I'm not asking for the romance to take like 100% of the screen time, but just some key scenes that were already in the manga, just to be added in order for the story and Kenshin's journey to make sense. What happens to Kenshin's redemption, which is crystallized through Kaoru? What happens to the philosophy of the Kamiya Kashinru? What happens to his feelings, his dear feelings for her, and the fact that he constantly reminds the audience and the reader in the manga that she is the one and only most important person in his life? What happens to the idea of having the courage to live an honest and authentic life that is conveyed through Kaoru's, character? This legitimately drives me insane, and I think that I need a moment. For example, one of my favorite scenes in the entire manga was the walk Kenshin and Kaoru share when she tells him she wants to stay by his side forever. Meanwhile, Kenshin quietly suggests that their path will probably separate one day. Oh god, I love this scene so much. The tenderness, the romance, the vulnerability, Kenshin putting an arm around her and opening up emotionally, all of this get lost. And I think that if you want to suppress and delete some scenes because it's a live action adaptation and you cannot add everything that was in the OG material, then at least keep the scenes that actually matter, because this chapter and this scene matters a lot actually, because it settles down everything and makes you understand why Kenshin is fighting in order to preserve that home and that one person that gives him that home, because he spent his entire life wandering and now he has a place he can go back to. That's literally what he's saying in this chapter. The more I watch these films and the more I feel like Kaoru, not only in the final but in all the previous movies, is constantly orbiting the story without ever truly being allowed to participate in it. And this movie only reinforced that feeling. You can tell she's important, but it almost feels like all of that importance happened off screen. Like, you're simply expected to assume she's important without being shown why she is. You can feel the potential, you can see the outline of what her role should be, but the film never follows through on it. She's been reduced to the role of a conventional love interest waiting at the finish line for the hero after he's done fighting. But Kaoru has always been so much more than that. Far more than some emotional pillow for Kenshin to collapse onto. She's the woman who gave meaning back to his life. It is so insane to rip that entire dimension out of the story and just leave behind only a few crumbs. I honestly think the filmmakers eventually realized that they couldn't remove her completely, so it just feels so weird. Okay, I am calming down a little bit and let's move on because I think I've made my points. Kaoru isn't the only victim of this phenomenon. Aside from Megumi, who actually received a fairly faithful adaptation of her character arc in the first live action, what about Sanosuke and Yahiko, who were almost completely sidelined as well? Sano gets stuff a little easier, I think, because he's still active throughout the action scenes, he brings energy to it, he's funny and charismatic, and I love him. And whenever a fight breaks out, he immediately injects so much needed punch into the scene. But in terms of pure characterization and development, I think that it's a little bit bland, which is so frustrating once again because in this arc he is supposed to be so frustrated by Kenshin's attitude that he practically doesn't recognize him anymore. He's so fed up that he literally punches him in the face multiple times before leaving on his own personal journey of self-discovery, and most of that is nowhere to be found here. But I get why those chapters dedicated to Sanosuke were removed, because they were not essential to the core of the story, and once again it's a movie, not a full-on series, so like you have to cut things, of course. But the case that generally baffles me the most is Yahiko's case. In the manga, this is arguably where he shines the brightest. It's an arc where he proves that he truly embodies the values Kenshin taught him, that he possesses the same reckless courage, that he is worthy of inheriting the spirit of the Kamiya Shinryu. Usually it's Kenshin who is the most protective one, and I've always found their almost father-son relationship super touching and I love them. But in Jinchu, the dynamic kind of shifts, and for once it's almost Yahiko who, for a bit, has to shake Kenshin out of his despair and becomes the one leading by example, the one reminding Kenshin of everything he himself taught others. Unfortunately, none of that survives in the film, but once again, from the very first movie, Yahiko has mostly existed to pop in occasionally and deliver a joke, and don't get me wrong, he's funny and cute, but he's so much more than just sort of background comic relief, and he is deep down an incredibly mature child who's constantly growing. He is impulsive, yes, but fiercely loyal, and the kind of character who could easily have been the protagonist of his own shonen series. The live-action version of Yahiko feels heavily infantilized, and because the fights focus almost entirely on Kenshin and Enishi, with occasional detours toward Misao, Aoshi, Saito, and Sano, there's simply very little room left, both narratively and physically, to incorporate the character arc that were so important to these characters. They are important not only for the characters individually, but for Kenshin as a character, because he learns from all those different backstories and point of views. It makes you understand why those characters are important for his own journey, and why they are the people Kenshin chose to just spend the rest of his life with, and his buddies that will forever stay by his sides. I understand once again that those arcs weren't strictly necessary. The film could survive without them, but at the very least I wish it had preserved their determination, their anger, and their agency, because, like, I don't know, they kind of feel like background characters. Okay, I'm being a little harsh. Background characters is probably stronger than what I actually mean. Because if there's one thing these live-action films have consistently excelled at, and especially this one, it's the everyday interactions between the characters. Well, I think that the live-actions in general don't have enough slice-of-life quieter moments, but it's mostly because they are movies. There's one scene in particular that had me smiling like an absolute idiot in front of my screen. Early in the film, the group is walking through town when they come across a Western-style bride participating in a wedding procession. Since we're in the middle of the Meiji era and Japan has only recently opened itself to the outside world, and foreign customs still attract a lot of attention, naturally a crowd quickly gathers, and then we simply watch the group react to the bride, comment, and tease each other, and they look like the sweetest found family ever. Megumi mentioned that she'd love to wear a dress like that, and think that she'd look great on it, but she immediately adds that she could also pull off a traditional Japanese bridal hairstyle. Sano, being Sano, instantly shuts the idea down by telling her that it would never work because her head is too big. Like, yeah, that guy has no mercy. Meanwhile, Yahiko starts teasing Kaoru, who's clearly daydreaming and probably thinking that one day she could marry Kenshin. The two playfully shove each other around, everyone joins in, and Kenshin himself even makes a slightly awkward comment.
確かに綺麗なものでござるな。あら、薫殿？どうしたでござるか。
自分で考えなさい。
That right there is pure gold to me. This is the kind of shit I'm into. Those kinds of interactions were already important in the manga because they helped establish the group's chemistry. But here, they're elevated even further because they generally an authentic group of friends and even a family. Kenshin looked genuinely happy to be spending time with these people, and seeing him happy warms my heart every single time, so credit where credit is due. The directors absolutely nailed that aspect, and scenes like this also make the later attacks hit much much harder because by that point you're emotionally invested, you care about these people and you understand what Kenshin stands to lose. And as a result, the tension becomes much more effective. But once again, it works because of those small key scenes, but I wish that we could see even a little bit of each character's personal struggles, aside from Megumi because she had her whole individual arc in the first movie. Also, quick side note, but the director ships Sano and Megumi so hard. Like guys, so hard. The two of them get all those tiny little moments together throughout the film and it's so adorable. Like, it made me laugh more than once, but it also made me kick my feet because I am a feral Sanosuke x Megumi shipper and they knew exactly what the audience wanted. They delivered. Despite all of those warm and comforting moments, the film ultimately seems far more interested in the friend group as a whole than in Kaoru herself as the embodiment of Kenshin's ideals and the very reason he chooses to keep fighting. The problem is that as a result, the message starts to feel kind of cliche. It's reduced to something like, I'm fighting to protect my friends and I found the meaning and the answer that I've been searching for all those years of wondering. I know I want to make the people I love smile and they are my family and I want to protect everyone. Like, yeah, sure, we've heard that speech in just about every shonen and action series released over the past few decades. Like, don't get me wrong, it works, it's effective, I like that. But compared to the powerful OG message of the manga, it feels kind of disappointingly shallow. If I were to summarize Jinchu's central message, it would be this. By dedicating yourself to bringing happiness to the people around you, that happiness gradually becomes the foundation of your own. It's through making others smile that you slowly learn how to smile again yourself. You don't heal by pretending your past never happened, but you heal by learning to live alongside it, and that's precisely where Kaoru becomes indispensable, because you need people that don't necessarily make you forget your past, but help you to just live peacefully with the idea that you have people who are accepting you as you are and just considering the person that you want to become and that you are in the moment. All of that inspires Kenshin and reminds him that there is a place embodied by Kaoru where he belongs and where he could always go back to. What about the moments where Kaoru cares for Enishi, unknowingly reminding him of Tomoe? Or the scene during their first confrontation at the dojo where Kenshin completely loses his composure the moment Enishi suggests laying a finger on Kaoru? And actually, I'd like to focus on that point for a second. I've spent a lot of time talking about Enishi and Kaoru, but what about our main character? So, Kenshin felt a little too composed throughout the film. One of the reasons I love the Jinchu arc so much is that it exposes the deepest wounds Kenshin had spent years trying to bury. We see him being terrified, disoriented, completely overwhelmed by what's happening around him. It makes him feel profoundly human and it allows us to connect with him on an even deeper emotional level. Here, he kind of feels too calm, especially after Kaoru's supposed death. Now, don't get me wrong, the reveal of her body was phenomenal. It was horrifying and it sent chills down my spine. But Kenshin himself barely seems to react, or his reaction feels nothing like the emotional and psychological collapse he experiences in the manga. In this part, he completely shuts down. It's as though every drop of life has left his body. And anyone who's read the manga knows just how pivotal that moment is. Not only for the story as a whole, but for the Jinchu arc specifically. I understand that adaptations require compromises and scenes have to be shortened. But personally, I would have much rather seen those cuts happen during the action sequence. Because do we really need all those hype action scenes? Yes, it's spectacular fights that are one of the franchise's biggest selling points, but at the end of the day, I'm still here for the emotional weight, and those action scenes are not what I'm here for. Once again, the choreography is incredible, especially during the final battle. I had chills, the pacing is excellent, it perfectly conveys Enishi's desperation, the almost pathetic way he keeps throwing himself at Kenshin, desperately trying to force a victory that emotionally slipped away long before the fight was over. I'll never stop saying this. Rurouni Kenshin is not a story that shines because of its fights. You're not watching Rurouni Kenshin, or at least that's not my case, because you want to see some cool action sword fight scenes. They are phenomenal. in the manga and in the live action, and they get me hyped every single time. But they're a vehicle for telling a story built on compassion, kindness, and emotional nuance. A story that genuinely changed the way I see certain things and honestly helped me grow as a person. So those live action films often feel like a compilation of spectacular fight scenes. You'd be hard pressed to find action choreography this good anywhere else. But beneath all of that, the emotional core only really works if you're watching these films on their own. And as an adaptation of the OG manga, though, it's frustrating and it leaves you wanting so much more. But enough complaining. Since this film excels far more in its presentation than in its storytelling, let's spend a little time talking about the presentation. I think we've earned a breather. First of all, I absolutely love the costume design, especially when it comes to the villains. I mean, just look at Enishi. The moment he took his jacket off during the final fight, you lost me. You lost me. What was I talking about again? Beyond Enishi, his followers all look fantastic. They're creepy, intimidating. The exaggerated design from the manga are still here, but they've been translated into live actions in a way that feels believable rather than ridiculous. And I think that they pull it off brilliantly. Of course, as I've been saying throughout this entire review, choreography is simply gorgeous. Huge credit once again to every single actor involved. Everything flows so naturally, the movements are so fluid, the action is constantly exciting to watch, and everyone looks ridiculously cool and everyone oozes charisma. And I have to give a special shout out to my girl Misao because she looked amazing and I loved every single one of her fight scenes. And as always, Kenshin fighting entire groups of enemies by himself never gets old. Like, my guy, how are you this good? Please tell me. What is he doing here? Okay, I actually went back to double check the manga even though I was already 99% sure, but like, nope. This really is an OG edition. Sojiro shows up once again. Yeah. I am not entirely sure how I feel about it. On one hand, you'll never catch me complaining about Sojiro getting more screen time because I love his character. But on the other hand, it kind of felt like, can I say it? It felt like fan service. Okay, Sojiro fans, I was kidding, I wasn't serious. Put that gun down, put that gun down. Sojiro is an incredibly popular character, especially in Japan, and you'll find entire fan accounts dedicated exclusively to him. And yeah, he deserves every bit of that love, but his presence didn't really feel necessary. I struggle to understand what narrative purpose he served here. Like, maybe I'm just nitpicking and I should just be glad that he's here, but it almost feels like the filmmakers wanted to capitalize on how beloved he is. And look, I understand the strategy, but it's awkward, like it doesn't quite belong. I don't know what is he doing here, and I don't know, I'm just frustrated that he gets screen time, but Kaoru doesn't get enough screen time for the importance of her character in this arc, because what is Sojiro doing in the Jinchu arc? You belong to the Kyoto arc. Let's put the Sojiro case file aside for now, because this live-action adaptation actually made quite a few additions compared to the manga. Some of them worked surprisingly well, others not so much. One good example would be the final battle. I actually really liked a lot of the additions the filmmakers made to make the fight feel more dynamic without crossing into over-the-top territory. For instance, the setting itself is quite different from the manga, and I think that change works in the film's favor. Wait, did he just stab him? Okay, the first time I watched that scene, I burst out of laughing. It was nervous laughter, okay? I was not making fun of him, but like, that came completely out of nowhere. Like, bro, you did not have to go that far. I understand that you want to kill him, but just calm down. Aside from that little emotional whiplash, though, the final also adds several genuinely heartbreaking moments that beautifully highlight the pain both Kenshin and Enishi are carrying. One of my favorites is the moment Kenshin looks Enishi straight in the eyes, apologizes to him, and only then delivers the final blow. It is such a quiet moment, and yet it says, absolutely everything it needed to say. No grand speeches or melodrama, just a few carefully chosen words. And those are often the lines that I think stay with you the longest. Another moment that really struck me, when Enishi screams at Kenshin that he deserves to die, Kenshin quietly admits that, well, he's already thought about dying countless times himself, and it never actually solved anything. Do I even need to elaborate? That single line adds so many layers to his character, and it encapsulates who he is by this point in the story. Well, the end of the story actually. His guilt hasn't disappeared. His regrets haven't disappeared. The desire to simply escape all of that has crossed his mind more than once, like anybody else. But after everything he's been through, he finally understands that death isn't redemption. Living is. And I just love that addition. While we're still on the subject of Enishi, there's also the scene where he reads Tomoe's diary and he completely breaks down and I don't even have the words. I love this scene so much. For just a moment you look at him and you see a child, a little boy who lost the person he loves most in the world, and all you want to do is reach through the screen and just hug him. Oh, that scene is just so heartbreaking. There is also the conversation between Megumi and Kaoru when they reflect on everything Kenshin has been through. And Megumi tells her that as long as their hearts are still beating, she can keep creating new memories by his side. If Megumi seems to understand Kaoru's role in the story better than the filmmakers, then I honestly don't know what else to say. So, overall, no, this is not a film you should dismiss. If this is your first experience with the Jinchu story, chances are that you'll have a fantastic time. Without the manga as a point of comparison, your expectations aren't already sky high. You're simply watching an exciting, fast-paced film with a compelling story, excellent dialogue, and some of the best action choreography you'll find anywhere. But if you've already experienced the manga or watched the anime, then honestly, it starts to feel less like an adaptation and more like a rushed, messy live-action summary. And I know I've said this at the end of every single one of these reviews, but I'll say it again. It is not a bad movie, not even close, and I recommend it without hesitation. I'm simply disappointed because the manga set the bar so incredibly high. In trying to condense everything into a single film, the filmmakers chose to sacrifice emotional build-up and quieter character moments in favor of racing toward the climax. To be fair, that climax was executed fantastically, but it still leaves a bittersweet aftertaste in my mouth. And that's everything I wanted to say. I know these live-action reviews have been coming out in the most chaotic order imaginable, so thank you for bearing with me. I also know I previously said I wasn't planning to review the very first live-action film because I didn't think I had much to say about it, but these videos have been way too much fun to make and I rewatched it recently, so I think I'm gonna do it. If you enjoyed hanging out with me, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I've got plenty more videos on the way and, well, I'll see you next time.